agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, a professor of political science at Northern Kentucky University. I'm joined today by my conservative counterpart, Cleveland area attorney Jay Carson.
Good morning, Mike.
Hey, Jay, how are you doing this week?
Well, I feel like I'm almost through the haunted house, right? Maybe not out yet, but we're getting close.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, exactly. I definitely know that feeling for sure. And you know, on that note, Jay, I wanted to do something a little bit unusual, but you know, you mentioned Election Day is almost here, and as probably will surprise nobody, we're going to be devoting almost all of this episode to the upcoming elections. But it occurred to me that no matter what happens, there are going to be around at least 60 million Americans who are going to be very disappointed with the results, at least of the presidential election. It's a lot of people. And I know what it feels like to be.
We bring disappointment to people every week.
You know, yes, we do. But I know what that feels. We both know what that feels like. I realize I look back and I'm 50-50 on voting for the winning presidential candidate at this point. So I know what that feeling is like. And of course, I felt it in 2016. And I just wanted to say, no matter how things turn out, no matter whose candidate, if your candidate turns out on top or not, that, I want to offer my condolences if you end up on the losing side, whoever you're supporting. And not only that, but to suggest that maybe it's not a bad idea to plan for things not to go your way. I thought about that and I was just sort of gobsmacked by 2016 and I didn't know what to do with myself. And so this year, even though I feel like things are looking pretty good, I felt that in 2016, I have a plan in place. I seriously, I mean, now maybe you don't, I was thinking, Jay, maybe you don't need that as much as someone like I do. I think you've always had the ability to distance yourself from this more so than I have.
Yes, yeah.
And that goes back to the time when to the times when we were a college together. I think it's just a personality sort of thing. But I think there are a lot of listeners who do feel this very personally. And when their candidate, because will lose, and one of them will, it's going to be rough. And so I have a plan in place. It involves, setting aside some time for some hiking, some meditation, maybe listening to some music, trying to get out of my head, basically, just in case things don't go the way I want them to. And I would just wanted to suggest to listeners that if you are that sort of person like I am, where this sort of thing hits you very hard, maybe it's not a bad idea to have that plan in place so you don't end up spiraling, because that can be pretty rough. And so I just wanted to, offer that word of, advice and also consolation to a lot of our listeners who are just going to be really bummed out and worse by what happens, on Tuesday and the aftermath.
Well, and I'll add, again, I think maybe it is just a personality thing that I tend to take these things less personally. And I guess, from maybe the conservative viewpoint, is almost, again, this is the small c conservative viewpoint. Look, America will go on regardless of who is the president and who is in the who controls the Senate. It's our country, our nation is bigger than like a particular set of policies. And again, I've been on the winning side. I've been on the losing side plenty of times. And what you suggest is sort of a page out of like the Stoic playbook, right? And that's something that you and I sort of weirdly kind of came across separately. Mm-hmm. But it's the Stoics sort of say, look, assume things will go wrong. And you'll be prepared for it. And it's not pessimistic. It's just sort of a realist approach that stuff doesn't always go your way, and a lot of stuff is out of your control.
Absolutely.
And this is one thing that is necessarily out of your control. I mean, certainly you can vote and campaign for folks and do your part, but in the big picture, it's bigger than any of us. So yeah, I think that approach is a good one. And look, the sun will come up on Wednesday morning, regardless. We will carry on. So.
Sure, absolutely. And so before we get to all the election stuff, just a couple quick announcements. First off, thanks for everyone who's subscribed and given me feedback on my new podcast, Politics Makes Me Sick. That's been an interesting experiment. I've been posting episodes every Friday. And so thanks so much. And you can find it, of course, wherever fine podcasts are, or maybe not so fine podcasts are available. And also, I always put the link in the show notes. So thanks a lot on that. I really appreciate it. Also, on our Discord channel, that's for Patreon supporters, I've put up a new listener questions area for people, who have questions, and we're in fact going to answer some of those questions on our supporters only show, which for this week is actually going to be open to everyone because it's going to be about a lot of election stuff, and we wanted to make that available to everyone, which we do on occasion, just to give people a sense about what the bonus show was like. And so that will be up on Tuesday. We're going to put it up on Election Day because, of course, talking about election thoughts after the election wouldn't make a lot of sense. You might want to check that out. And to check that out, just go to patreon.com/politicsguys. Also, we'd like to thank our newest sustaining supporters, Billy, Kathy, Andrew, and Eric, who's a longtime supporter who recently increased his level of support. Kathy wrote in, she said, "Huge thanks to all of you for this informative podcast. I've been listening for a while after a recommendation from my son, who's a high school senior. I look forward to each episode, appreciate the thoughtful way you all share opinions, and have been encouraging my friends and family to listen. Many thanks." Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And Eric wrote in to say, "I'm loving the show so much, especially with the students, that I just had to increase my monthly support. It's way more sustaining than spending it on pizza, and I love pizza." So I really like that too. Eric's been with us for a while, been very active on various forums we've had. And so Eric, thank you so much. And of course, when you're a supporter, you do get that second full-length episode. You get ad-free versions of all our shows and various other things. And again, to check it all out and to get that open to everyone episode this coming Tuesday, it's patreon.com/politicsguys. And finally, I wanted to mention just a real quick thing. Some of you may have briefly seen an interview episode with Thomas Ricks that I posted. It came up and went down. It wasn't anything weird. It was just I actually forgot that I had agreed with the publisher to not put it out until the book comes out on November 10th. And so once I realized that, or was made to realize that, I pulled it down. So if you saw something and you couldn't access it, that's why it will be coming back up in the not too distant future. So sorry about that.
Big tech censored it.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. So, a story that would have been, I think, the big story in any other week just about is, of course, the confirmation and taking of the oath, the joining the court of Amy Coney Barrett as the next Associate Justice on the Supreme Court. Now, it was an entirely predictable end, I think, to this, right? 30 days after she was nominated by President Trump, she's become an Associate Justice. And that fills, of course, the position left vacant by the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg on September 18th of this year. And given Barrett's age, she's 48, there's a pretty good likelihood, I would say, that she'll be on the court, really, if you look at it, until the middle of the century, if not even longer. And she, of course, joins Trump appointees Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch. And that cements a pretty solid 5 and sometimes 6 conservative member majority on the court. And all of the Senate's Democrats voted against the confirmation, as did one Republican, Susan Collins of Maine, who is right now in the midst of a pretty tough re-election fight. So, Jay, what are your thoughts, if any, on the confirmation of Justice Barrett?
Well, I would say, as a conservative, Justice Barrett is sort of exactly the type of jurist you'd like to see on the court. And there was a lot of talk, and I think this was helpful. And quite honestly, this is one of the reasons, and you and I dispute the historical record on this, but I'm sure I argued this at one point about Merrick Garland, about let's have hearings, because it's important to get that out there. Let's have this discussion about jurisprudential theory and what it is and what it isn't. So I think her performance in the committee sort of ably set out that Scalia originalist / textualist, and there's some weird differences if you really want to get in the weeds between originalists, textualists, literalists, but I think it's instructive for the country whenever we have one of these to have one of those real deep dive discussions on judicial philosophy, and I would say, I mean the Senate Democrats, and I get, obviously this is their job, right? This is to try to prevent this in some way. I mean, push these sort of, this is what are her policy choices, particularly on healthcare, Obamacare, and I think she answered appropriately, and I think for the most part the answers have been from the right have been appropriate. That, listen, we don't pick justices based on are they going to approve of this or that policy. It is their outlook on how are they going to read the law as it was written, based on the time at which it was written.
Which just so happens, in a happy coincidence, to result in policy outcomes that we like.
Well, yeah, yes and no, but I mean, I think there's plenty. I mean, for example, take Gorsuch's opinion on in the case with the Indian lands in Oklahoma. That was something. I think there's a lot more. I'm trying to think of the word I'm looking for. I don't want to say diversity, but it's because it's not exactly diversity. There's a wider spectrum of opinion from the so-called conservative justices, right? I mean, you'll have Justice Roberts who will join in with the liberals on certain issues because he feels the importance of stare decisis is more important than even, say, originalism or textualism as to a particular law or statute. You have Gorsuch who will sort of go the other way on the Indian case, and also the same-sex discrimination case, which was going to add, with this Title VII cover discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. And I think most of your originalist textualist people would say, well, no. Gorsuch took sort of I call it sort of a strict literalist approach, and came out the other way, much to the surprise of a lot of people. So I think there's a lot of room, and to say that it's just conservative justices always vote the policy that they approve of. I don't know that that's the case, but
well, yeah, and I'll just jump in to say that I largely disagree with you. If you take away Justice Roberts, who I think is a principled conservative and does lead with his judicial philosophy and not his policy preferences, I think Chief Justice Roberts, has been a happy exception. And even though I don't agree with him on certain things, I believe that he sort of tries to play it fair. Whereas I think that if you take a look at Justices Alito and Thomas, and certainly those two would be the clear examples that they've been pretty much doctrinaire. And so, yeah, Roberts aside, I think it's a pretty clear, strong conservative bloc, and that's why they're nominated, of course. And that's exactly why a lot of conservatives have been upset with the Chief Justice, because he hasn't been a tame sort of a tool of the right, and that's just an awful sort of thing. And I expect that Justice Barrett will be a very tame tool of the right, because that's why she was picked. And it remains to be seen. Certainly.
To say tame tool of the right, I mean, I think there are a lot of, you can have some really good faith disagreements with Justice Roberts, particularly on Sebelius. Look, just on the statutory language, he essentially had to add language into the statute to make it work. And those are, I don't think those are I don't know, to call a Supreme Court justice sort of a tool of the right or left, I think is sort of a little denigrating.
Well, wait a second. Let me stop you there, Jay. I mean, we weren't going to get into a big discussion on this, but so are you saying that if I believe that somebody is essentially picked to be a tool of the right, and if they act in such a way that I should not be able to call them that because it's denigrating? What if it's just true?
Well, I think when you say should I
stay in my lane, watch my place, watch what I say? I mean,
Oh my gosh, no. I think when you say tool of the right, that means sort of beholden to this is how they're going to rule on a policy issues, and that's why they're chosen on.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly why they're chosen because because they're going to rule that way. I have no doubt about that.
Well, let's put it in the so the healthcare case that's pending now, the sort of the next Obamacare overturn. I think most every court watcher who looks at this is saying no, the court's not going to strike down and get rid of all Obamacare protections to the extent that the mandate was a tax and the part of the statute was based on the Commerce Clause and the tax idea. That might get struck down, but it would not. It would be severable from the rest of the bill. And I think you may well see a 9-0 case.
No, there are already justices who have pretty clearly indicated that it should be the whole thing should be invalidated. There's no way that Justice Thomas is going to not say that. There's no way that Justice Alito is not going to say that. There will be at least 3, I would expect 4 and possibly 5 votes to overturn to rule the entire thing unconstitutional. Now, Justice Barrett, you can make the argument, and I think it's not an unreasonable argument, that she may not vote that way. And I think it's fair to say that Democrats who have been saying that she's a certain vote that way, that's stretching things further than the evidence would indicate. But there's no way that's going to be 9-0 or even 7-2. They're going to be 3, 4, possibly 5 votes to overturn that.
To overturn and with
to invalidate
no severability.
To invalidate the whole thing. Absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Absolutely.
Well, we can place our wagers on that.
Yeah, I will
bet you it's at least 7-2. That the mandate may be struck down, but the bill, the rest.
The mandate was already struck down, Jay. The mandate was taken out in the TCJA, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, the Republican. So there is no mandate anymore. And so the question is, without the mandate, can the rest of the law stand? And I think at least 3, probably 4, and possibly 5 justices will say nope.
So, all right. Well, we will see.
We will definitely see. So let me ask you this. What do you think about how this confirmation, how this affects the prospect of enlarging the court or other possible changes to the makeup of the Supreme Court if Joe Biden wins and there's a Democratic majority in the House and the Senate?
Well, I think obviously there was Senator Blumenthal, for example, on the floor. Made a big deal about sort of, saber rattling and threatening that there would be expansion of the court. Although I don't think he used those terms. I think it was, there will be consequences and so forth. And he'd used those terms before in a amicus brief to the court that, rule our way or else. It remains to be seen. I think there's going to be so much, if the Democrats take the Senate, there will be significant pressure on them to move forward with repealing the filibuster and trying a court packing plan. That said, I think that's still a heavy lift, and I don't know that they get everybody there.
Yeah,
I think particularly the other thing to think about is if I'm right, which I will be, and you have decisions going the way that I think they might. That will sort of let the air out of the balloon a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's which is what happened. Again, going back to the precedent of this is FDR in 1940. I want to say 40, right? 40, 41?
Although this time there won't be, I think it was earlier than that, there's in the 30s, there won't be a switch in time that saves 9. There won't be any switching. But yeah, I agree with you. I don't think anything will happen in the first 2 years if there's a Biden administration, because number one, like you, I don't know that they'd have the votes to change the court, even if they have the votes to end the filibuster. And my take on that is, I don't think they're even going to have that, because Senate Democrats who feel like they're in a tough position would rather vote to keep the filibuster than vote to pack the court. And so if they
Yes.
end it, you see what I'm saying, obviously.
Yes, I know. I get exactly. Yeah. They save themselves the tough vote.
Yeah. And not only that, but in 2022, Republicans again will be defending a lot more Senate seats than Democrats. And so that could put them in a position where they could possibly build slightly on a majority. And if there are any adverse Supreme Court rulings that really get folks wound up, like an Affordable Care Act, like something on reproductive rights, then I think that potentially puts Democrats in a stronger position to do that. But I still think, I say the odds are against seeing any sort of significant change to how federal judges are selected and the size of the Supreme Court. That's my prediction.
Well, the other piece that I didn't mention this on Discord is Joe Biden didn't come out with a statement regarding what his intent was, and he said his intent was to create a commission to study this because it looks to be out of whack, is his words. So we'll have the federal court whacking commission appointed, and that's usually the way places go to die, stuff goes to die, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. He wants to say something to try to at least partly placate the people further to his left, and that's kind of as far as he feels like he can go. Yeah, I agree.
So you'll have a bunch of folks who are appointed, and maybe there's some argument over who they are, or what their qualifications are, appointed to that commission. But they'll study and they'll hear testimony for a couple months, and they'll come out with some report saying, yes, maybe there could be some changes we could do, or maybe not, and it'll be sort of inconclusive, and it'll sit there. So
you and I would talk about it on the show, and it would be about it.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, absolutely. Staying with the Supreme Court, they've had a pretty busy week ruling on a number of cases involving voting procedures in this upcoming election. And the court, for instance, this week declined to disturb a ruling from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that allows for ballots that are received within 3 days after Election Day to be counted. And there was also a ruling by North Carolina's election board that allows ballots to be counted as long as 9 days after the election, so long as they actually have a postmark by Election Day. And the Supreme Court didn't disturb that. But in Wisconsin, the court declined to reinstate a lower court ruling that was reversed by an appellate court that would have added 6 days to the deadline. Now, to me, Jay, it seems like what's going on here is, the media is portraying it as wins for Democrats and wins or losses for Republicans, or vice versa. But it seems to me that's going on here. There's actually a philosophy I can sort of see running through this. And it seems to me the philosophy is defer to state legislatures and state administrative bodies, but don't let federal courts kind of do more than what the state has agreed to do or not do. Is that your take? Or
I think so. And that's, quite honestly, these kind of cases, one of the reasons why I took a little issue with the idea that some of these folks are just sort of ideological tools, because look, they're not certainly these cases. Now, in some cases, these aren't necessarily opinions; these are decisions not to take cases. But still, the purpose, the function is about the same. No, I was actually on a conference call, and the speaker was the state solicitor of Ohio. It was through the dreaded Federal Society. But it kind of raised the exact same point, that this looks more like deference to states, and that especially given COVID, that there's almost like an extra level of deference. It isn't just the usual that you would give some deference to states' decisions on voting. It is a little expansion of that because this is, extraordinary election. And look, the federal courts don't want to be in the position of telling each and every state and then down to each and every board of elections, polling place what they can or can't do. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, and that gets into something we talk about a lot on the show, you and I especially, is that, what is the role of the courts, and should they be doing, should they be sort of interpreting, putting their will ahead of the will of the people or their elected representatives? And not only that, I think, but kind of a related issue to that is, what there are things that might be good policy that we think should be done, but just because something is maybe questionable policy doesn't mean that it's, not within the rights of the legislature to make that decision or non-decision, as much as you may dislike it.
Exactly. Yeah. As Scalia used to say, you wish he had a stamp that said, dumb but constitutional.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or dumb but legal. Yeah, in this case, yeah, absolutely. And one thing I did want to mention, though, is on this is Justices Thomas, Alito, and Gorsuch, who were writing, they actually did write not a dissent exactly, but in the Pennsylvania case, they argued that it seemed to them likely that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court actually overstepped its authority by essentially usurping the state legislature's right to determine the time, place, and manner of elections, as is in the Constitution. Yeah. Now, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court argued that they do have this authority based on the Pennsylvania Constitution's free and equal elections clause. But even though those three justices felt that they didn't really buy that argument, they, in their words, reluctantly concluded that there wasn't time to decide this question before the election, though it wouldn't be surprising if this came to the court after. And in fact, those votes that come in after the election day are going to be set in a separate pile, if you will, in case that comes up. Yeah.
Well, and I think I think that's probably the right call all around. So, I mean, the difference I think in the Pennsylvania case is that they were looking at, there is a statute that gives a hard and firm date, and the statute says what it says. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court sort of said, well, it says what it says, and unless we say otherwise. Now that would, by most any standard, be classified as some pretty severe judicial activism. So
yeah. On the other hand, the argument is,
I get that, but I think at the same time, the Supreme Court did probably the right thing in not wading in and saying, look, Pennsylvania, this may be a Pennsylvania constitutional problem, but we're not going to try to sort out how the Pennsylvania Constitution works and give that decision within a week.
Yeah.
So I that's what I mean. I would agree with the dissenters, and I agree with the decision not to take the case.
Yeah. So let me ask you this.
That makes sense. Again, not really dissenters, but yeah.
Now, in the North Carolina case, it seems to me it's actually an easier case, right? Because it doesn't involve a court, a state or a federal court trying to overturn or trying to instruct, a legislature or another body to do something. But the issue at hand is that if votes come in with a postmark by Election Day, even if it's as much as 9 days late, they should be counted according to North Carolina's election board. And I wanted to ask you about that. Do you think that all ballots that are postmarked by Election Day, that they should be counted?
Yeah.
Okay. And what about, and I agree with you, of course, on that. And what about before I get into that, I should say that the Postal Service says that their policy is to postmark all ballots mailed by voters, however they're, if they're prepaid by election officials or they're mailed. It's right there on their website. So hopefully this isn't much of an issue. But I wanted to ask you, what about ballots that are, say, come in a day after Election Day? They don't have a postmark. How do you feel about that issue? Because that's the Pennsylvania, or at least could be the Pennsylvania issue.
Yeah, no, I think that's more problematic, right?
Yeah,
because you look. I mean, if we're going to have an election and look, again, me as a traditionalist, I'm not a huge fan of early voting and expanding the election back, through a month or 6 weeks for a whole lot of reasons.
Yeah, I'm with you.
But extending it out the other way, I think, is even worse. And I think unless you have some sort of evidence to say this vote was cast before Election Day, I think it's really problematic, both to the appearance of legitimacy of the election and also from protecting it against actual fraud. And I know that your position is fraud hardly ever happens, but if you say, okay, we're going to count ballots which are not postmarked, and we'll count them after Election Day, that might be an incentive,
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Well, just to put the fraud issue aside, because I think that that's sort of a red herring. I think what we can focus on what we agree on, and I agree with you that when in the absence of an Election Day, by Election Day postmark, I think there needs to be some sort of evidence to support the idea that this was in fact mailed. Now, if it's one day after, I think you can make a pretty strong case. One day after is probably okay if the Board of Elections is okay with that. But once you get more than that, then that really does become really problematic to me as well, for all the reasons that you will point out. And of course, something that bothers me, and of all the things that bother me about the president, is his call. In recent weeks, he's been calling for all the votes to be counted on Election Day, when he knows that that's not possible due to many states not being allowed to even start counting mail-in ballots or even preparing ballots for counting before Election Day. And that to me, and people have said, well, but he doesn't understand the distinction or something. I find that awfully hard to believe. And I would imagine that you have a problem with anyone saying, well, we should just announce the result on election night, no matter how many votes still aren't counted.
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. I think that's right. And I would be in the camp of that. Yeah. Trump probably just doesn't understand.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. Okay.
I mean, on the one hand, you can't have it both ways. He can't be a moron and an evil genius.
Well, I don't think he's a moron. I mean, I guess there are people who think he's a moron. I don't think he's a moron. I think he's, he doesn't take time to inform himself on a lot of policy issues, but I'm pretty sure that in anything involving his election and maintenance in power, I think he's very well informed on all that.
Okay.
If it's about Donald Trump, he knows about it.
Yeah. Well, that's a fair reading, I think, of the man. I think that's not helpful to the extent he does know what he's talking about and is doing it intentionally. Yeah. Because different states have different laws about when they can start counting, when they can make call races and so forth. And again, it's keep in mind, it's not states, I guess, or boards of elections that call races. It's the media.
Right.
In states, the race isn't sort of called until the result is certified, which is usually a couple weeks after Election Day, for those very reasons that we just talked about, because it affords time to get mail ballots in and double check if there are contested ballots, double check and deal with provisional ballots, all those sorts of things. Deal with recounts if necessary. I can. And so it's not an official government agency that's calling the election. It is the media that calls it on that night, and so I think that's just an important distinction.
Absolutely. And of course, we agree on the key thing, which is that every legitimately cast ballot that's cast before Election Day should be counted. And that's, I think, what everyone who really cares about the integrity of elections should agree on. So it would be pretty weird if we disagreed on that, for sure. So, let's talk more specifically about the election. I mean, everyone, I think, is just saturated with prognostications, but just to kind of revisit our predictions and maybe talk a little bit about what we expect the immediate aftermath of this election to look like. And Jay, the last time we did the show together, this was a few weeks back, you predicted a Trump win and I believe you predicted Republicans keeping control of the Senate, though maybe with losing a seat or two. and the Democrats holding on to the House with, I think, more or less the current margins. Is that right? And has
Wow,
your view?
I did?
What's that?
I did?
I thought that's what you predicted, but why don't you just why don't you just refresh my memory if I'm wrong on that and tell me what your current take is? I guess let's go with that.
First of all, let me. I should put out the caveat here that I have, after 2016, I've significantly lost faith in my ability to predict these things, and I'm feeling even less faith now, and that's. It's there are guys who are football stat guys, right, and can tell you every game, and Giants by 7 in this one, Bucks by 14 on, and just with an incredible level of accuracy. And I feel like I used to be that way about elections, and I think I still am on a lot of like local issues, right, on state and local stuff. But I got the 2016 wrong, sort of spectacularly wrong. And I'll tell you, if I'm looking at the scoreboard right now, I would say, well, Biden is going to win. But there's also there's a weirdness out there that I just can't account for.
Yeah. You're not alone.
And let's put this back. I can't sort of account for it in that I think our system of polling, our polling technology is sort of not up to the Trump moment, right? I mean, it's sort of that traditional polling works in traditional races, but I don't know that it works here for, shy voter bias is one. The amount of new registrations and new folks voting, just the fact that the where our phone systems work now, right? I mean, you don't just get a phone call at home on your landline. You have all sorts of blocking technology, and there are a lot more telemarket calls, so people ignore calls from numbers they don't know. So I think there's a lot of that going on that adds uncertainty to the polls. But I would say, looking at the scoreboard now, I would predict a Biden win. I'm not sure on the Senate. I think it'll be close, but I think Republicans still may hold the Senate.
Okay,
and Democrats definitely hold the House.
Yeah, and when I look at this, I mean, I've looked a lot into the polling question, and after 2016, polling organizations made a number of adjustments, and those adjustments seemed to work really well in 2018. And of course, in 2016, the polls really weren't off that far at all. In most cases, they were pretty much within historical norms, and they're pretty good historically. I think 2016 was the confluence of a lot of things, and of course, Donald Trump won with 304 electoral votes then. But you take a look at that environment, 8 years of the first black president, the Democrats nominating not only the first female ever, but a person with a ton of baggage, right? A lot of people longing, I think, for something different, which Trump most, assuredly was. And I think some bad luck, right? The Comey investigation thing right at the end. I would argue some miscalculation and some hubris on the Clinton side. And it was like a perfect storm, basically. And it didn't even seem to me like Donald Trump expected to win. And so all of a sudden, the accidental president. And right now, I feel, given what I've learned and what I know about the polling adjustments and how things have changed in a lot of ways and how the confluence of events is unlikely to come together, I feel reasonably confident that Joe Biden will win. Not positive, but confident. My larger concern is my doubts about, or my questions about the extent to which President Trump might cast, aspersions on the legitimacy of the election, and also concerns about civil unrest that could follow the election. And so I was wondering, to what extent do you have those sort of concerns?
Will Trump cast aspersions on the election? Absolutely. I mean, he's Donald Trump.
Unless he wins, yeah. Unless you say, this is a great election.
No,
yeah.
It is. It's the Citizen Kane scene, right, where they have the two headlines, and Kane wins in landslide, and the other one, fraud at the polls.
Yeah, massive fraud. Yeah, right.
So I think that's just what to expect from Donald Trump. How seriously do people take that? Does Donald Trump saying that the result is illegitimate really ring true with a lot of people because he says lots of things are illegitimate. I mean, with some people it will, sure, but I don't know. I don't see any civil unrest on behalf of the Trump side.
Really?
I really don't. I don't think that's gonna. Oh, I mean, I think you could have some people protesting here and there, but you're not going to have anybody smashing windows, lighting fires, that sort of thing.
Well, I hope you're right. Yeah.
And I think it also comes down to sort of situational sort of things, right? I mean, because the way I see stuff breaking down, it would be a matter of, look, and here it would be like a Florida 2000. Here we have one state, and then we have a couple counties where votes aren't counted, or there's irregularities there, and then there's these votes should go in and no, count all the votes, and so you'd have dueling protesting there. Right, but it would be sort of localized, I would think.
Yeah, that makes sense. One real concern I have is something that's been called, been termed blue shift. This idea that in especially Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, which by law are not allowed to even pre-process ballots, mail-in ballots, until Election Day, that what we're likely to see is initial polling showing that President Trump is in the lead. And then when a lot of these mail-in ballots are counted, even after Election Day, particularly in Pennsylvania, which almost everyone seems to believe will likely be the kind of hinge state, that all of a sudden that could change, and then President Trump could try to make a claim that, well, these are all these fake, fraudulent ballots that are, turning the election. And that to me is the most plausible path that the president could take if he doesn't clearly win re-election, to sort of really make a lot of people feel that this was illegitimate. And then my concern is that even if we go through and, Joe Biden is sworn in on Inauguration Day, that president starts with, millions and millions of Americans just saying, you are not a legitimately elected president of the United States.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was sort of the challenge that Trump faced, though, right? I mean, there were immediate things about, look, it's the Russians, and so forth. And there was certainly some on the left who have never accepted Trump as a legitimate president. So I mean, I think that could happen.
On the other hand, on the left,
terms, I don't think it will happen in big terms. Again,
yeah, I hope you're right.
I think maybe it's we always tend to overestimate the strength or the persistence of the other side. And I don't know that.
I hope you're right. I was going to say on the other side, we could see a red shift, right, in a few states to Trump. Like, for instance, Texas, even Ohio, and I think Iowa and Nevada, they actually can count or process votes before Election Day. And so initial returns there could be much more. I wouldn't be surprised if early on it says, well, Biden has a good lead in Texas, and then all of a sudden, or Ohio, and then all of a sudden that's going to go away, because I don't think that Ohio, I don't think that Texas for sure is going to go to Biden, and I don't really think Ohio is, but I think it might look that way on Election Day for a while. Then that would open it up for a lot of people on the left to see what's going on here. And so that's my concern there as well.
And all of which is sort of fuel for my argument that, look, again, this year is weird because there's a pandemic, but otherwise, why can't we just vote on Election Day?
Well, and why,
again,
for some people,
making exceptions for people who can't get to the polls, for people who have difficulty getting to the polls, have some kind of condition that would prevent it, or going to be out of town. All those reasons. But I think that, again, this is, the more you expand the ways and times and manners in which people vote, the more uncertainty you inject, and the more of this opening you leave for people to say, look, it's fraudulent. There's something going on here.
And I actually understand that. And I think that people who try to make the argument that mail-in voting is exactly as good as voting at the polls, I don't know that they're really thinking this through, because we know for a fact that even though mail-in voting increases voter turnout, and I would argue that other things being equal, that's a good thing. We also know that a certain percentage of mail-in votes for various reasons are not counted. They're rejected for various reasons. And that rate is almost always going to be higher for mail-in votes. And so I think in a perfect world, yeah, people would go to the polls. And I would argue that maybe there should be an expansion of early voting and say the week before an election. But again, other things being equal, it's better. I'm with you. It's better for people who can to actually go to the polls because that's the most assured way of making your vote count. So you and I agree on
and
that.
And also very quickly throw in just my other a couple of points on that argument for anyone who's interested. I mean, I think the other piece is early voting distorts the election cycle in terms of messaging, in terms of when candidates are making closing arguments, and you say people are voting sometimes on not having the whole picture.
Yeah.
And third is really the weird intangible one, and I think I'm the only person out there making this argument that there's something good in sort of the national unity of everybody going out and voting this day, right?
Sure.
This is the day we do it. There's something very American saying I'm going to go vote, and you go and you stand in line with your neighbors, and there's a sense of shared civic responsibility, I guess, that I don't think you get it by just marking up a ballot at home and sending it in.
Sure. And I know that you believe that there shouldn't be massive disparities in the time that you have to devote to that process, that it's that it's just wrong that some people have to wait 3, 4, 5 hours or more, and that we should take action that states and counties should take action to make sure that there aren't those sort of unreasonable delays.
Yeah, exactly. But again, that to me, that's a local logistical issue. You know what I mean?
Well, I think in
you can
part,
work that around. And I understand you'll say there ought to be more federal money for it, and maybe you're right.
I think just because,
but again, it based though, that's a logistical problem.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely. So, yeah, I think on voting, you and I, there's not really a lot of distance between us because, I think we both believe in the importance and the integrity and making sure that everyone who wants to vote has a reasonable ability to do that, because that's kind of what it's all about, really. All right. So, when you and I were talking about the topics for this week's show, I mentioned this article from National Review that I thought was really excellent. And I've been reading National Review for decades at this point, well before there's even an online National Review. And I will argue
you're the one who got me started on National Review.
There you go. I think it's one of the best places to go for, I would say, a consistently thoughtful, conservative perspective on things. And I'm happy to be a National Review subscriber. And I think it's a very important publication. And that article that I mentioned to you was something called On Trump and Voting Your Conscience by Jay Nordlinger. And in it, he suggests that there are 3 basic types of Trump supporters. The always Trumpers, people who love Donald Trump because, he's Donald Trump, the people who went out and bought the MAGA hat right away, all that kind of stuff. People who I think, Jay, back in your and my kind of salad days would have been Pat Buchanan folks, right? Then you have the kind of get along to go along Trumpers, the people who it's like, well, everyone around me is kind of doing that. So I don't really like the guy, but I'm going to keep my mouth shut and it's better for my career, for my whatever, that kind of thing. Go with the program. And then we calls the anti-Trumpers, the people who are so aggravated by what they see as kind of unremitting attacks, unfair attacks on the president, that they push back by supporting Donald Trump even more than they did in 2016. And I really wanted to get, Jay, your take on that taxonomy and if you found a place for yourself in it.
I would say, I would say, and first of all, I'm a big fan of Jay Nordlinger for a lot of reasons. And I think it's almost like I feel sort of a kinship. He also writes a lot about classical music for National Review and other places, which I just think is really cool because to me, conservatism, the whole part of it, it's not just about politics. It's about sort of an overall culture. Yeah, exactly. And he is a champion of sort of high Western culture that you don't see often. And I was able to hear him speak a number of years ago, and he was fantastic. And he's also very funny, and also a Midwesterner from Michigan. So I agree with him on most of the taxonomy. If I had to put myself in there, I'm probably closest to the anti-Trumper camp.
Kind of
right?
what I thought. Yeah.
Although it's, to me, it's, again, I sort of see there's sort of another taxonomy he doesn't put in, which I think Kevin Williamson did, another piece, and which was titled "Hell No." You can get the idea of where Kevin's coming down on that. But on the just the lesser of two evils type thing. So I think I'm probably somewhere between the anti-Trumper and the lesser of two evils kind of situation. But no, I think there's been a large heterodoxy, I guess, on the right on this question. And National Review sort of has run sort of this multiple, series in their election issue of there's sort of a hell yes, hell no, and then there's sort of the Trump, I guess, or it could be worse sort of thing, and all of them are really worth reading.
I wanted to ask you because, the more, aside from the taxonomy, which is interesting, but I think the more important part of Nordlinger's article, and where he gets to kind of his reasoning on this, is he argues that President Trump's, what he calls, I guess, his closeness to dictators, his touchiness about Russia to the point where intelligence briefers are supposedly even reluctant to mention Russia if it's in a negative way, the fact that he promotes conspiracy theories, all of that and more, essentially, in Nordlinger's view, disqualify him or should disqualify him despite other things that are going on. And he also talks about the argument that the idea that the country will be literally doomed if any Democrat wins is just wildly overblown. And I think Kevin Williamson sort of picks up on this even more forcefully because the only way Kevin Williamson knows how to write, I think, is forcefully, right? His argument, I took it, is that the biggest disasters of the Trump presidency, trade, immigration, and pandemic response, are the things that Donald Trump has been most involved in, whereas the only parts of the presidency that are a success are the areas where he either knows or cares almost nothing about, right?
Yes. Benign neglect.
Yeah, and so his conclusion is that anyone who argues that Donald Trump's presidency has sort of in and of itself been good for America is either some combination of dishonest or delusional. And, I wanted to get your take on that. And I guess also along with what I see as sort of a movement among conservatives who I've always gotten the sense that you really have a lot of respect for. There's George Will, there's Nordlinger, Kevin Williamson, Jonah Goldberg, Peggy Noonan, and a bunch of others.
Huge respect for all of them. Yeah.
Yeah. And they've all changed their mind about voting for Donald Trump. I think these were mostly people who voted for Donald Trump in 2016. And Peggy Noonan, in her last column before the election, said, I can't vote for Joe Biden, but I can't also, my conscience won't allow me to vote for this man, Donald Trump. And I wanted to get your take on all that because, the last time we talked, you said, well, essentially, I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. And so I was wondering if the kind of weight of all these people who I know for decades, in many cases, you've had a great deal of respect for, has that sort of changed your view on anything or not?
Well, it's for consideration. Yeah. To me, that makes a big difference that there are people who I find very thoughtful, who I have read for decades, followed for decades, who sort of take the position, which is, again, this is the position I took in 2016. That look, I can't vote for Hillary, but I'm not going to vote for Trump. The difference that I get, and sometimes, Mike, I get the feeling you're trying to talk me out of voting for Trump.
Go figure.
But
I just think you're making a huge political and ethical, more importantly, more ethical mistake.
Right.
I think.
No, I understand.
But
I understand.
and so I feel like it would be wrong of me because you're a friend. I think it would be wrong of me to not do that.
No, I appreciate that, and I do, and I don't want you to think or anyone else to think that I'm not conflicted, right? That it's not that this isn't a tough call.
Let me just say this, and because I think this is really important. At the end of Kevin Williamson's column, Jay, I'm an idealist at heart.
Yes.
That's not really hidden, but at the end, there's this very idealistic bit that just really got to me, and I'm going to read it. He writes, consider the possibility that the duty of the patriot in these times is not to choose one pack of jackals because it looks a little less hungry and vicious than the other pack of jackals, but to oppose these jackals, these demagogues, profiteers, and hangers-on, these greasy little salesmen trying to sell you something that is already yours, and to insist that the free and self-governing men and women of this struggling republic deserve better than what is on offer. We can have better than what we've had because we can be better than what we've been.
Right.
And
Well,
I just thought, yes. And I just thought, I hope Jay reads this and says, no, I cannot. Well, I cannot.
I sent it to you.
Yes, I know. And I said, when you did it, it gave me some hope, thinking that I don't expect you to vote for Joe Biden, Jay. I know that's out of the question. But what I'm pushing for now is, because I know you vote on election day, that maybe you'll hesitate before you fill in any name in that presidential column.
I will. And Mike, I would say, yes, I will hesitate. And I am going to give this a lot of thought. But, just so you can kind of understand my thought process on this, is one, let's say Trump's a horrible human being. I think that's a pretty easy point to concede. He's mishandled a lot of stuff. That's an easy point to concede. He has, in many cases, snatched victory from the jaw, or snatched defeat from the jaws of victory, on a lot of conservative causes. He's set back a lot of conservative causes just by his Trumpiness, right? Of the cause, the issue. Instead of pursuing the issue, it's gotten bollocksed up with his personality and his. Again, I can't come up with a better word than just Trumpiness, right? He has sort of lowered, I think, the entire. I mean, he's almost sort of the polar opposite of, say, like a Jay Nordlinger, right? Mm-hmm. A very very smart, classy sort of guy, and so yeah, that's all that troubles me very much on the one side. On the other side is, I think there's a shift, and this happened. I think it probably in 2018, with the election of some of these far left folks of AOC and the Squad, and the Bernie Sanders rise, and the push towards, hey, socialism is okay. It's just sort of another policy choice, and the wokeness and the tearing down stuff. And I'll tell you, Mike, this is, I mean, between you and me, the Joe Biden, the moderate Joe Biden, the Joe Biden of the 1990s, I could see myself voting for that Joe Biden, or at least not voting for a President Trump against that Joe Biden. But I don't know if that's the Joe Biden that's on the ballot this year.
I hear what you're saying, and let me just counter with this, that I agree, and this I think Kevin Williamson or maybe Jay Nordlinger might have mentioned, is that the AOC, progressive left folks are what they call it, punching above their weight. And I agree that's true, but I think that's only true in social media and in the media in general. When it comes down to voting on things, whether it's the Green New Deal or court packing, I think both you and I know how this is going to go. How it's going to go is those 30, 40 or so Democrats who've been elected in conservative-ish districts are going to say, I can't do this. And Joe Manchin and a few other kind of more moderate Democratic senators are going to say, I can't vote for this. And so while certainly there's going to be a change in terms of regulation and staffing, I just do not think that I think that the Squad and the progressive left is going to be horribly disappointed with a Biden presidency and unified Democratic control of Congress if that in fact happens.
Well, and again, I'd hope you're right. And I think, I mean, quite honestly, this is stuff that I've been thinking a lot about, because look, there is something, and this is just part of the political game, right? And you advertise that your opponent is not only bad, but your opponent is going to absolutely destroy the country. I was just flipping through channels last night and ran across Sean Hannity's show, which I don't watch. And I just kept flipping. But the headline sort of in the crawl was like, Trump recovery versus a Biden depression.
Trump called it super depression that we were going to have. I believe. It's a new phrase.
And look, I'd point back to in 2016 of all the folks who were saying that a Trump election is going to be a fascist state and a dictatorship and all this sort of thing. And I completely get the sometimes you have this campaign rhetoric to appease the base. And did I ever really believe that we were going to build a great big beautiful wall across the entire border to Mexico, pay for it? No, I didn't. I sort of accepted that all the time as that is election and Trumpian hyperbole. What we did get was some sort of replacement fence to part of it, which I think is okay. And you can say that that's sort of the argument that Democrats are making now too. Are we going to get court packing, abolishment of the filibuster, new states, reparations, Green New Deal, all that, stakeholder capitalism? Maybe it's all just political talking points. And when they actually come down to vote, they're going to say, no, we're not really, it'll be a much scaled back version of those type things. And will amount to what we talked about. Look, it's going to be more federal spending, more regulation than what I would like, but not a wholesale change in how the country is governed. So I'm conscious of that, but at the same time, I think there's something a little different about this moment, and what happened in Portland and Seattle, and that concerns me greatly. That we just might, that there may be. My point, I made this to someone the other day, is Trump will be gone in 3 months or 4 years and 3 months, regardless. Big sweeping changes, getting rid of fossil fuels, packing the court, new states, all those things. Those are much more permanent, and so there maybe is I stand up on virtue and say I'm not going to vote for him, or I vote against him and say, screw you, Trump. Is that worth risking the loss of these other institutional things, the major institutional changes to the country that I'm concerned about?
Yeah.
That's sort of the calculus that I'm looking at.
I don't think I don't think those major changes will happen, and I think you
you
really are doubtful too. But I'll leave it at this, Jay. I think that 10, 20, 30 years, when you're looking at your grandchildren, you will be happy to be able to say, I never voted for Donald Trump. I think that will be something you will be happy to say. So we'll leave it at that. But before we do,
I can say it at one point already that I didn't vote for him.
I know, but I think you'll be pleased to say I never cast a ballot for Donald J. Trump for anything in my life. Say what you will otherwise about me. All right. Before we go, I have a recommendation this week. Speaking of Donald Trump, there's this really interesting podcast I came across called Fallacious Trump. It's really a cool idea. They use President Trump, things he said and done, as a vehicle to explain logical fallacies. That's kind of like their main thing. Then they also have what they call a British politics corner, which covers, British politics, the same kind of idea. And then a fallacy in the wild. It's sort of a neat idea. And like I said, again, regardless of what you think about Donald Trump, he's just a walking example of logical fallacies, when he speaks to those rallies. And so it's kind of a neat idea. Their latest episode, they cover this thing called, I never heard of it, called the prosecutor's fallacy, which is a new one to me. They talk about that with President Trump on COVID and masks. And so, I think I teach about logical fallacies in a scope and methods, research methods class. And it's neat to sort of see someone try to use real life examples of that. And you could do it with pretty much almost any major political figure. But because Donald Trump is so, as you call it, Trumpy, he's just he's easier to do
and ubiquitous. I mean, there's just a whole lot of material out there that he's putting out. Yeah, exactly.
So I came across them, and they put out a new episode, I think, every couple of weeks. It's kind of a neat thing. And they also have these really neat show notes. We should maybe do this. They have a section called, not all the time, but a lot of time, called called Stories We Really Didn't Have Time to Talk About, which I was like, hey,
Okay.
we know about that. So anyway, I'll put the link in the show notes there. But yeah, it's pretty interesting. I'm sure you can find it by just, searching for Fallacious Trump on your podcast app. But yeah, I came across that and I wanted to recommend it. So.
So my recommendation is I'm reading Gordon Wood's The Americanization of Benjamin Franklin.
Oh, okay.
So I've become sort of a big reader of Gordon Wood for a number of reasons. One, I'm a big revolutionary, early Federalist kind of history buff. That's kind of my thing. Usually more like the early federalism and less, far like colonial stuff, which just goes kind of farther back. And also because Gordon Wood has been one of the scholars who's been pretty outspoken against the 1619 Project and saying this is just bad history. It's just wrong. But anyway, he's a great writer, and it's a really fun book. It came out about 2006, I think. And really sort of a side of Ben Franklin that I didn't know before. Again, if you're into this kind of thing and into finally, kind of getting behind the scenes and seeing, the founding fathers as who they were and real people with their, weird peculiarities. But Ben Franklin was very much a pro-British guy for most of his career. He was actually pushing a plan for the British to take over Pennsylvania, which was what was called a proprietary colony. It was run by the Penn family, and as opposed to a crown colony. So it's really interesting just the how he got from point A to point B. And there's also a funny thing about him being sort of a rising from the masses, right, and being sort of a commoner in that very stratified world of the 18th century, but how it even sort of translates into our stratified world today. That Franklin is in many ways seen as sort of a bourgeois founder, right, because he was kind of a Poor Richard's Almanac and this sort of conventional folk wisdom and saying things that would get Amy Wax fired, that kind of stuff. So anyway, no, I just think it's
cool.
It's a fun thing to
sounds
read.
Good.
The other thing I finished, again, I'm just laying on now because again, in this sort of stress, I've sort of been looking for American stuff to cling to, and I finished reading Mark Twain's Life on the Mississippi. It's one of those books I kind of read and picked up and put down. But again, that's a wonderful sort of sense of America kind of book that you get. And I'll also put in Mark Twain is actually really, really funny that we don't give him credit for today.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that.
So.
All right. Well, that's definitely some good stuff. I wasn't aware of the Gordon Wood book, and I might have to put that on my Amazon list actually. So.
It's not like super long either. It's not like a big. I mean, some of Gordon Wood's books are big. These huge encyclopedic sort of things, but this is
Yeah. All right. I think you mentioned that. I think I mentioned to you that right now I'm reading a book called The Enchantments of Mammon, How Capitalism Became the Religion of Modernity. And it's like this 800-page kind of, so that there's a tome that I'm getting through right there. And I shared, listeners, I shared a part or two of it with Jay, and it made him groan, and it made me just sort of swoon almost. But anyway, maybe I'll talk more about that at some other point. But that is it for today's show. And again, remember that our bonus show this week is going to be freely available to everyone at patreon.com/politicsguys. We're going to be talking a lot about some election-related listener questions. And if you want to become a supporter, that's where you go as well, patreon.com/politicsguys, to get all that extra good stuff. And maybe being a monthly supporter, too much of a commitment, we get that, or occasionally just want to send us a little attaboy. You can do that through our PayPal site, and you can find the link on our website, politicsguys.com. There's a PayPal link there. Also, something that costs nothing but really matters a lot to us is if you could subscribe to the show if you haven't already, and leave ratings and reviews, and especially sharing episodes on social media. That matters quite a lot. And if you want to get in touch with us for any reason, mail at politicsguys.com. And we're also on Facebook and Twitter. And we'll find the links there in the show notes. The executive producers of Politics Guys are Bruce Johnson, Wilma Morano, Andrea Masker, Daniel Toe, Chris Wilkerson, and Nathan Sosnowski. We'll be back with a new show next week. We hope you'll join us.